Before we begin, let me ask you something. What if the story you were taught about Africa was incomplete? What if an entire civilization was reduced to silence before the world ever had the chance to understand it? What if the map you see today is not only a map of land, but a map of forgotten memory? Pause for a moment and think about this. How can a continent that gave humanity some of its earliest civilizations suddenly be described as empty, primitive, or chaotic? Who told that story? And why? Welcome back to Chronos Vault. Here, we do not simply listen to history. We sit with it. We question it. And sometimes, we recover what time and power tried to bury. Today, we begin a journey through one of the most consequential stories in world history. How Africa was divided, exploited, and reshaped by European power. But before we speak about conquest, we must first speak about what existed before the conquest. Because one of the oldest strategies of domination is simple: erase the memory of what came before. If a people forget their past greatness, they can be convinced they never had won. So, let us travel back in time long before colonial borders. Long before the Berlin Conference. Long before European flags were planted across African soil. We begin with a truth rarely told in full. Africa was not empty. Africa was not waiting to be discovered. Africa was not a blank page. It was a continent of kingdoms, scholars, merchants, cities, and complex political systems. Across the vast lands of West Africa rose the powerful empires of Ghana, Mali, and later Songhai. These were not small tribal arrangements, but organized states with taxation systems, armies, trade regulations, and diplomatic relationships stretching across continents. The Empire of Mali, under the famous ruler Mansa Musa, became one of the wealthiest states the world had ever seen. When Musa traveled to Mecca in the 14th century, his caravan carried so much gold that it reportedly disrupted economies in parts of the Middle East. But wealth was not the only treasure. In the city of Timbuktu, scholars gathered in libraries and universities long before many. European institutions were established. Thousands of manuscripts were written on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, law, and philosophy. Africa was not only trading in gold and salt, it was trading in ideas. Further east, along the coast of the Indian Ocean, a chain of thriving cities formed what historians now call the Swahili city-states. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar were major centers of commerce, connecting Africa to traders from Arabia, Persia, India, and even China. Ships moved across the ocean carrying ivory, gold, spices, and textiles. These were cosmopolitan societies where languages, cultures, and religions mixed. Africa was already part of the global economy centuries before European colonial expansion. In the forests of present-day Nigeria, the Kingdom of Benin flourished with remarkable artistic and political sophistication. Its famous bronze sculptures displayed a level of craftsmanship that stunned Europeans when they first encountered them. To the south, the Kingdom of Kongo developed organized governance, international diplomacy, and trade networks that reached deep into Central Africa. And in the Horn of Africa stood Ethiopia, one of the oldest continuous states in the world, with its own written language, Christian traditions, and imperial lineage stretching back centuries. These societies were not identical. They had their own struggles, rivalries, and internal conflicts as every civilization does. But they were alive. They were evolving. They were connected to the wider world. Yet something curious happened when Europeans began writing the dominant version of global history. These civilizations slowly began to disappear from the narrative. Maps began to portray Africa as a vast, undefined space. Travel writings spoke of darkness and wilderness. The story shifted, and when memory changes, power soon follows. Because before land can be conquered, the imagination must first be conquered. If the world can be convinced that a place had no civilization, then the taking of that place can be framed not as conquest, but as civilization. This is why understanding Africa before colonial rule is not just about correcting a historical detail. It is about restoring a historical truth. A truth that reminds us that Africa was not merely a victim of history. It was also a maker of history. But the story we are. Beginning today will show how that world slowly became entangled in the ambitions of expanding European empires. In the coming chapters of this journey, we will explore how curiosity turned into competition, how trade turned into control, and how maps drawn in distant rooms would reshape the destiny of millions. Because the division of Africa did not begin with borders on paper. It began with ideas. Ideas about wealth. Ideas about power. Ideas about who had the right to rule the world. And those ideas would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic meetings in modern history. A meeting where men who had never walked most of Africa would sit around a table and decide its fate. But that story begins in the next chapter. Stay with me in Chronos Vault. Because the deeper we travel into history, the clearer one question becomes. Was Africa truly undeveloped? Or was it deliberately undeveloped?